As chair of the Government Oversight Committee, co-chair of the Democracy Reform Caucus, and as a member of the Senate Ethics Committee, issues pertaining to strengthening ethics, governmental accountability, reducing lobbyist influence, and getting money out of politics are at the core of my legislative service and have been since I arrived here 7 years ago. I want you all to imagine something that I've long thought as very possible within my lifetime. Imagine a state government, Mr. President, that operates with the best interest of Maine people, not one based on who writes the biggest check. Imagine a state government that isn't unduly influenced or hindered by special interest groups. Imagine a state government where industries cannot financially sway the very lawmakers in charge of regulating them. Imagine a state government where access to elected officials is not determined by payment at a swanky fundraiser. We don't have to just imagine it. We can make it happen here today with this vote. We have a momentous opportunity before us to address a topic that has long been the third rail under the State House dome: campaign finance and ethics reform. Currently, Maine has strict contribution limits for legislative candidates, but not so much when they actually win and enter office. And the proliferation of political action committees, or PACs, have revealed rampant loopholes to our anti-corruption laws. PACs have no contribution limits, which means corporations, special interest groups, and lobbyists can literally spend unlimited amounts of money to garner access, influence, and potentially a vote in the Maine legislature. In 1 year, 400 entities hired 229 lobbyists and spent nearly $5 million to lobby members of the legislature. Now, why are large multinational corporations and lobbying firms giving $1,000, $5,000, or even $10,000 to a single lawmaker? And just so you know, it's not out of the charitable goodness of their hearts. There is an expectation of a return on that investment. Anthony Corrado of Colby College and the Brookings Institute says, generally donors who give to leadership PACs are looking for access to legislative leaders. They're hoping to have their voices heard when their matters come before the legislators, and therefore they tend to give on both sides of the aisle, end quote. There is a big difference, Mr. President, between a $10,000 contribution from outside interests and a well-regulated, limited contribution of either $400 or a $5 clean elections qualifying check from one of our constituents. When lobbyists are able to donate such large amounts of money, it raises the question, who will lawmakers feel most accountable to, a constituent or a big donor? What's even worse is when corporations and lobbyists seek out legislators who serve on certain committees that directly impact their line of business. For example, it's been common practice for telecommunications and utility companies to contribute thousands of dollars to members of the committee that regulates them. That means companies such as CMP and Spectrum are directly taking advantage of a system that allows them to try to influence policy outcomes. To most anyone, to the layperson on the street, Mr. President, this would seem like an obvious conflict of interest, a violation of public trust, but it's completely legal under our broken laws. When it comes to contributions from lobbyists, the only stipulation currently on the books is that lobbyists cannot give money to sitting lawmakers while we're in session, which is usually, as you know, January through April or June. But make no mistake, this in-session ban is no stopgap measure. The influence is still there no matter what time of the year the contribution is made, which is normally right before session begins and right after it ends. There is a reason all of our inboxes get flooded with fundraiser invitations right before the sound of the bell when session begins or right after sign and die when session is over. If it's deemed inappropriate for lobbyists to contribute to lawmakers while session is going on, it should be inappropriate before and after session and the rest of the year as well. While it is clear there is a First Amendment right to lobby the legislature, and courts have also held up the right to make campaign contributions, it doesn't give free range and blank checks for lobbyists to use money to secure access and bolster their position with legislators. Courts have recognized that where the recipient is a legislator, the state is justified in regulating their contributions to protect public confidence. We specifically crafted language to allow free speech consideration for lobbyists. Lobbyists in your legislative districts would still be allowed to donate to their local candidates, just like you, and their PACs. They can exercise their free speech as a citizen while still tightening the rules in their employment as a lobbyist. In the case of gubernatorial candidates, this free speech consideration will essentially bar out-of-state lobbyists from contributing. And I've heard from many of you in this chamber about the need to tackle money pouring in from out-of-state in our elections. This starts to get at that issue. At least out-of-state lobbyist money would be banned under this law. On the flip side, Mr. President, we see legislators on both sides of the aisle target professional lobbyists for large campaign contributions, a practice that poses a serious threat to legislative impartiality. When speaking with lobbyists off the record, they are yearning for the day where they themselves are not stuck in a vicious loop where they feel coerced into giving money. If they sponsor one fundraiser, they are called immediately to sponsor another one. Hey, you wrote them a check. Why not me? I've had at least a dozen lobbyists, Mr. President, approach me about supporting this bill. They want reform just as much as our constituents do. This bill and this subsequent amendment is the solution on all fronts. It simply extends the in-session ban on accepting lobbyist contributions to year-round, essentially all-out banning lobbyist contributions for lawmakers and the chief executive, as well as candidates for those offices. This amendment and bill is backed by the Maine Citizens for Clean Elections, Maine League of Women Voters, the National Group and Citizens United, the Maine People's Alliance, the Maine Education Association, and many others. According to the National Conference of State Legislatures, 5 brave states, Mr. President, Alaska, Kentucky, South Carolina, Tennessee, and California already ban lobbyist contributions at any time. Those bans have already held up just fine in the courts, and this is modeled after those successes. Maine should join them. This amendment, just so you know, removes party committees and ballot committee questions from the amendment to ensure we are zeroing in on the real issue, legislative PACs only, to make sure that there is not a giant loophole. If we want to really ban lobbyist contributions, let's not just talk about campaign committees, let's also talk about legislative PACs, so that it's a comprehensive reform. The system we have isn't working, Mr. President, for the average Mainer, not to mention for the lobbyists themselves. We need real reform, and it starts here today. Lawmakers are supposed to be the people's lobbyists. We have a chance to make sure lawmakers are not pressured or unduly influenced by lobbyists, and to make sure lobbyists aren't trapped into playing a game. This amendment is a long overdue course correction to champion honest-to-goodness public policy decision-making where money is taken out of the equation. Outside the State House, Mr. President, the public supports this 100%, Democrat, Republican, or in between. They don't want a government of the lobbyist, by the corporation, and for the bottom line. So I'm asking you to restore trust and integrity back into our governmental institution and pass this bill and pass this amendment. Of all the things we do in this building, in your time as a lawmaker, what do you want to be remembered for? What do you want to look back at your time here and be proud of the work accomplished? Wouldn't it be great to say you were part of an effort to fundamentally change how we do business for decades to come, reforming the system to make it more ethical, transparent, and accountable? This is our moment for real leadership. This is our moment to set aside disagreements and come together to solve a problem that plagues modern-day politics. Together, we can pass comprehensive campaign finance reform that for many years has been unable to do so. Pay-for-play politics is coming to an end with this vote, Mr. President, and I urge you to support the pending motion.